Apocalypse Now, Mad Max, Platoon, Born on the 4th of July, Casualties of War, Full Metal Jacket, Fight Club, Blade Runner 2049, Harvey Weinstein, Halloween, Rosemary's Baby, The Exorcist, the Star Wars saga, From the History of the Blues, As Seen in Cinema, through the film Unforgiven and its Japanese remake. Last week we brought you the second installment of our 500th episode special. We're going back through the archive, revisiting moments, examining how cinema's changed, how we've changed, and tonight we start in 2018, right where we left off. Last week we did a discussion that led us all the way to a survey of Native American cinema. Today we pick it back up. Episode 169, The Culture of Cool. We talked about the symbols and elements that affect or represent the cool aesthetic or what we think of as cool culturally, historically, through cinema. So this is what we pick up.
You know, when you do something for as long as we've been doing this for, the decade, and it's really it's kind of difficult to even say something like that it's been a decade. The thing about it is that you look back on who you were and who you've become in that time period, and it's these are kind of like in a weird way, they're kind of like diaries. They're kind of like these records of who we were at a certain time in our lives, and I think that's the thing that I place the most value on with this show and what we do, because it's definitely a recording of the memories of who we were and how that has factored into who we've become. So I'm each week that we've done this being our third episode into our remembering 500 episodes. It's a fascinating escape into the past, I guess is the way I would call it. And I'm really enjoying that because it's reflective, it's nostalgic, and it's sometimes in this case it's something that kind of slaps you in the face in letting you know who you were and who you've become. So let's get going. Let's talk about all that greatness, about all this these conversations that we've had over 10 years, and see what else is jarred in the memory. Yeah.
Episode 169. Remember, go to WatchThis with RickRamos.libsyn.com. So the Libsyn, Libsyn, the Libsyn site is our archive.
Mm-hmm.
That's from the archive, that's where everything gets sent to wherever the fuck else you hear it. Apple, whatever. So Libsyn is where we're at in terms of that's the bank. In April of 2018, we did episode 169, which was on the culture of cool.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that I wanted to correct, but there's not been an appropriate time. Now is the appropriate time. I think, and it's minor, but this is one of those little, I remember, and I've talked about this, and we will talk about this when we talk about TV, which is soon. I remember I used to watch Jeopardy.
Mm-hmm.
Mom used to love Jeopardy, and so I watched Jeopardy, and I got into it. And so sometimes Alex Trebek, the host of Jeopardy, the late great host of Jeopardy, you'd say, "Oh, I want to make a correction. Yesterday we did this, and now I'm doing that." Years later, I think so. In this culture, in this film, in this episode, about the culture of cool, we talk about the 50s kind of like we talk about like jazz coolness, hipness, the beatnik kind of images, the Marlon Brando, James Dean, white t-shirt, sunglasses, cigarette, motorcycle kind of imagery that is in the classic sense of cool, that really gets into cinema imagery and stuff like that. But we also go back to the work of Dr. Robert Ferris Thompson, who has since passed away, and into the African influence of cool and the aspect of cool that's a reaction to the oppression of African Americans in this country. So in that concept of cool, there is the term itutu, this Yoruba or West African term. And I think, if I remember correctly, and that's why I want to make this correction, I think in the episode I referred to it as Itulu, but I think it's Itutu. So this is minor, but it's enough for me to make that correction. And now I can fucking die in peace, you know?
No, you're settled.
I'm settled unless that's a mistake, and then we'll get back to you. We did an episode on questions where either listeners or you, Rick, or whoever, gave me some questions, kind of just like, what does this person, Ibrahim, think about film? What are some of these questions? We went into, you did this one on your own. Arlie Ermy passed away. So you did an episode remembering him. We did a Taylor Sheridan episode. Taylor Sheridan now has been all about like Yellowstone, like that series. At that point, we did Sicario, which was the first one at that time. We did Hell or High Water, and we did Wind River. We did questions, more questions from me, questions with me. Then we did a Kurt Cobain episode 175. So I suggested, hey, let's, it might have been, I think I had gone to Seattle around that time, and I was like, hey, this would be interesting. So it was, we did Kurt and Courtney, the Nick Broomfield gritty conspiratorial documentary. We did Soaked in Bleach. We did Kurt Cobain montage of Heck. It's 30 years since Kurt Cobain died. And it's crazy. It's if you're an adolescent and in your adolescence, that someone from that world or whatever genre or whatever, or even if it's not even your thing, but it's kind of like whether it's Tupac or Biggie or fucking, a couple of years earlier, it's Kurt Cobain, or it's Eazy-E in that mix. Also, I mean, it was around that time also that now I'm fucking blinking out. That from Queen, Freddie Mercury dies, and you have all these all the time you have deaths, but if you have something that's really hot, or it's happening, or it's relevant, and then the person dies even just then, and you're going like, wow, this thing was this flash in history, even then. And then throw on top of it, now it's kind of like this thing of like, oh, this person gets this tag of this is the voice of a generation, or what had happened had Bob Dylan died in the early to mid 60s. Like it would have, and then you go back and you think like, man, like that's crazy. I mean, there was a lot of 60s, late 60s, early 70s people that did die, and they died at 27, like Kurt Cobain. And you look back, and if you lived those times, and then you look back, you look back. You're in 1994 when Kurt Cobain died, but you're looking back at 1969, and you're going, that was fucking 25 years ago. What the fuck? Like, this person, it meant so much. to the culture at the time, and then they left then,
Mhm.
and now you're looking back and you're that much older. So it's crazy to think about Kurt Cobain. Whatever your opinions are, however you think, some people. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it's settled. His cause of death is settled.
Mhm.
Some people don't think that because they want to think, and typically it's the wife gets blamed. And especially if she's a fucking bitch.
Well, I was going to say that a junkie bitch doesn't make it an easier. It doesn't make it easier to close that case. So, in the court of public opinion. But the question that I have, if I'm stepping on toes and you want to continue, please do so. But what like Kurt Cobain, I definitely have my heroes and people that mean a lot to me. And when they die early, it's troubling. With Kurt Cobain, I don't understand being somebody of my particular tastes, and so what is fascinating to me is the effect that a person can have on a community and a people, and this being your genre of music and something that you embraced. I'm really curious as to why, if it was a big deal. What was that?
So real quick, ask me. I cut you off, but you said your genre, so you mean like rock music?
No, maybe genre's not the right word. Rock movement, or like he would be considered, the genre, I guess, would be considered alternative Seattle. If you could break it down that to a genre, but I think it's more like a musical movement that comes out, and it grabs a hold of the culture, and it's little things, the torn up jeans, the flannel shirts, the unkempt hair, the fascination with heroin, a lot of things that have played out in music and music style, and fashion styles that have come before that, but it becomes ubiquitous with this particular man and his all of the artists that were either his contemporaries or who would follow, and in some cases some of the ones that would come right before him. I can't speak to it because I don't know the music. I don't know Smashing Pumpkins, Stone Temple Pilots. I don't know that Seattle grunge scene. So my question is, with you being a teenager at the time of all of this, which I suspect you were a teenager when he, maybe late teen?
I was a teenager when they dropped, like when they blew up. I was a preteen when they blew up, and I was a teenager when he died.
Yeah, because it was only like a 4-year run, right? It was like a 3 or 4 year run.
Yeah, I mean, like Nevermind was 91,
and then In Utero
94.
So the fascinating thing is also being able to look at it from this perspective. Is 10 years later, or in this case 7 or 8 years later from the episode, it's what's fascinating is the idea that this could capture the culture in such a way. It could capture the attitude and the beliefs of the public, and can be so controlling. What was it for you? What was it for you that made it memorable? What was it for you that made it something that because I'm talking about before, for the death to have an impact, the music has to grab a hold of you first. So what was it about all that did that for you?
I mean, that's a big question. The couple little things first. So you mentioned, and I'm just being picky because I just want accuracy. So as you said, basically Stone Temple Pilots are of that same like time period in terms of like they would be considered. And I'm not talking about when groups formed, because a lot of these groups formed in the late 80s. and I know Nirvana they had their first album was Bleach. That was before. So when I say Nevermind 91, I know that that's their second album, but that's the album that really blew them up.
Yeah.
So Stone Temple Pilots aren't a Seattle band; they're a San Diego band.
Okay.
And the Smashing Pumpkins, I think they're from Chicago.
Okay.
So you have your big Seattle bands and you have your smaller Seattle bands. And the press said grunge, or it's always, it's like these genres. It's like, how do you sell records? How do you describe? You know what I mean? Like California jazz is cool jazz. You know what I mean? Like, and then when we get a concept of kind of like, and a lot of times it's this like dialectic thing where it's like, okay, this movement, and then there's a reaction to that. So then that creates that, and then there's a reaction to that. And then we start to look at it in terms of like this neat little timeline of things, of reactions that where we can look at the history and say, well, yeah, that way it makes sense in our minds. But there are always elements, like some people say, well, Patti Smith is proto-punk. And Velvet Underground, that's proto-punk. And you have post-punk, but sometimes you have proto-punk at the same time as punk. And you have post-punk at the same time as punk, you know what I mean? Or it's like, how do you define the first phase of goth rock versus the second phase? I mean, that's maybe a little bit easier because you have, a 10-year period, or it just gets weird.
But all of that is in retrospect on having the.
No, a lot of times it's not, because a lot of times it's at the time someone is writing an article or something, and then they describe it, and it may get taken up on a larger scale in retrospect, but at the same time it might get taken up on the radio by some DJ. Then and there they start saying, well, this is grunge, you know what I mean? Like, the term grunge isn't something that came out yesterday. Like, they were talking about grunge way the fuck back. Yeah. So to me, I think what was interesting is that the question you're really asking, I think, is, or I guess the way I'm going to take it is, my experience, I think, was a parallel experience to the greater cultural experience of listening to Nirvana, because it was kind of like you had what was happening before, and then with Nirvana, I think everyone recognized that this was someone, and now I'm speaking directly about Kurt Cobain, because he was the front man, he was the writer, he was the songwriter, he was the lead guy, all of that. Not to take away from the final lineup of Dave Grohl and Chris Novoselic, and not to do any of that. And Pat Smear later, who and he is in the music scene. He's like has his own accolades. Like that's that. But Kurt Cobain, for all intents and purposes, Nirvana was like the project of Kurt Cobain. I think everyone who took notice recognized that this was someone who was different from everything else. And if you listen to a lot of the Seattle music, especially like if you listen to Pearl Jam and you listen to Alice in Chains and you listen to Soundgarden and you listen to Nirvana, the biggest of these bands, you're going to say, okay, well, what do these people have in common in terms of the genre? And it's not like these bands all, like, some of them would hang out and you can see like elements of that kind of manufactured through that film Singles. But some of the bands, I mean, they weren't necessarily like all palsy-wowsy, you know what I mean? It's just one of those things where you get, it's like, well, what set Dylan apart? Well, we know Dylan, it was the lyrics and it was the content. Kurt Cobain, it wasn't as identifiable as like, oh, this guy is singing these on another level, poetic lyrics. It was just, there was such, I think, a singularity in his vision and such a level of authenticity that it was recognized, it was jumped on, I think, by the people who recognize in culture, the MTV, the fucking Rolling Stone magazine,
Yeah.
all these. And it was basically quickly like, they jumped on it and they pushed it. And so people who were like listening, recognizing it, were very quick to accept that he was being called the voice of a generation, or whatever he was being called at that time. And he had a look, which he was very deliberate about. He had a presentation. He was very, very specific about how he wanted to be seen. And if I now looking at it back as a 40-something, and other people have talked about this, other Gen X commentators, Chuck Klosterman, like, and others.
Yeah.
Gen X has this thing about authenticity. Gen X has a thing about keeping it real. And for people like Kurt Cobain and Tupac Shakur, the two big 90s icons, that may well have cost them their lives. For Kurt Cobain, that struggle between authenticity and like coming out of the punk movement, keeping that version of keeping it real, not being a sellout, not being fake. That punk ethos now paired with quick fame, being considered this whatever of your generation, which is not something that he asked for, even though for all intents and purposes he did. You know, Danny Goldberg, his manager, talks about this in the book, Serving the Servant. He wanted to be famous. He wanted to get his music out there as far and as wide as possible. But there were doubts about, have I sold out? Tupac Shakur, like, you start to, theater background, you start to play this part, and the part starts to play you. Yeah. And you gotta, keeping it real until it gets too real.
Well, but that's something that's been common throughout the history of the medium. I mean, I can remember Paul Schrader talking about Richard Pryor back in the late 70s during the making of Blue Collar. It was like Richard Pryor wanted to be the biggest actor, the biggest comic in the world, but he also wanted to be the blackest. And what does that mean? That's to a certain level of authenticity and not being seen as a sellout. And exactly the way that Kurt Cobain and the industry as a whole is designed to make money. So the industry doesn't give a shit about your ideals. That's why you have, what was it? The Beatles took Ringo and Paul McCartney took so much shit for at least being perceived as selling the rights to Revolution for Nike. Remember when the Nike commercial came out with Revolution?
Well, no, when was that?
That was back in the 80s. That was like, they would have people running and, then you would have that song come over the soundtrack. And it was like, people started to feel like it was a betrayal of everything that they stood for in the 1960s. Yeah. Sure. Which in effect is, in a sense, is true. And how can you call a song about revolution and everything that it's trying to preach when you're doing the bidding of Nike, a shoe, something as fucking as pointless as something like that. That's not going to change the world. That's not going to. That's anathema to the idea of what the song is about. Now, whether or not Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr authorized that, because then there's also that question of Michael Jackson owning the rights to that music. I don't fucking know. But there was a period where the 60s and the 70s morphed into the 1980s, and all of that shit was being sold off. So you saw Ford, Chevy, you saw them using rock and roll music. You saw them going against. It was a bastardization of the ideals of that music. And I remember Bill Hicks in particular shitting on all of that. And I know Tom Waits has had a great deal of problem with people wanting him to be a pitchman, and he's like, I don't sell soda. I'm a singer. I'm a songwriter. The song is what it is. And he sued and successfully beaten a lot of big corporations. So much so that he was able to basically finance the rest of his career on legalities. So there's an aspect to Kurt Cobain that is admirable as far as not wanting to sell out. But I don't know if you've ever said it. I've certainly said it, and friends of ours have said it, where the entertainment industry itself is one big whore fest. It's one big gangbang, and you're participating. If you go into entertainment, more so than just about any other industry, you are you will be forced to compromise to a degree some of your ideals. And
of course,
it's unavoidable. It really comes down to how much of my soul am I able to sell in order to create the art and have the platform that I have. I don't know. I find that to be a really difficult question. But
it is.
Yeah, but you and I both know, because we work in corporate America to a degree. If you really examine it correctly, you're compromising every fucking day. Every fucking day you're compromising.
The whole capitalist system is like based on that.
Yeah.
So it's
But like, is that the draw? Is that the draw? The rebel, the somebody screaming, raging against the machine, screaming into the night, trying to make sense of it. Yeah,
that's always a draw, and that goes back to the episode on Cool.
Yeah,
it's like, well, and Legs McNeil, the author and punk historian, talks about that, and I'm sure I mentioned it. Yeah. It's like Marlon, and I think the documentary where I think it's called Punk Attitude, and he talks about. I think there are two things it might be history of rock and roll too, because I mix everything. But two things he says. He says, number one, don't step on my blue suede shoes.
Yeah, you did say this.
He says it's because these things stuck with me. What he said. Mm-hmm. Legs McNeil says that it's fucking it's about personal freedom, which is political. Then he points to, or separately, he points to Marlon Brando in The Wild One.
Yeah.
And it's like they ask him, what are you rebelling against? And he's there on the motorcycle with his fucking cap like to the side, and he's like, what do you got? Of course, there's an appeal to that, especially to the it's the youth, it's the teenagers who are finding themselves, right? And you find yourself by differentiating yourself from your parents. Yeah. And so then that has to have a soundtrack. And that's what that becomes. And then it's like, well, you're rebelling against your parents, but the musician is trying to rebel against their record company, or what the record company wants them to sell themselves as, or the genre, or they're rebelling against their last fucking album, or they're rebelling against the bands that came before them, and then we get into that dialectic again, where it's like, well, this was a reaction to this, was a reaction to that, was a reaction to that, and then it becomes kind of like a linear thing that we can digest, and it's like, it's all of that, but it's none of that, because it's kind of like, if I could answer, or if anyone could answer, what made Kurt Cobain seem either special, and I think he was special, or seem special, which for sure he did seem special, or he was made to seem special. If they could do that, if people could really do it, they would have already done it, and they would do it year in and year out, and year in and year out, and it would make much more money than what they're making, because of course. But you can't do that. That's just kind of like what makes Joe Rogan the biggest podcaster in the world.
Mm-hmm.
What makes Taylor Swift the Taylor Swift of Taylor Swifts? If you don't see it, it's kind of like, I don't fucking get it.
Well, it's the old phrase of lightning in a bottle. It's just it's everything hitting at once, and it's not
exactly.
You know, sometimes I'll listen to interviews with Jerry Seinfeld, and I think Jerry Seinfeld is talented.
I hate Jerry Seinfeld.
I know you do. I know you do.
If you guys didn't know that,
but
I don't hate a lot of people.
I get it. Maybe one day we'll do an episode on it. I'll force you to watch a few of the episodes,
but I would love to do that.
But you know you would, and it would be a hate fest, and sometimes that's necessary to cleanse that palate. But a lot of times, what upsets me in his interviews is that you can do it.
Smug?
He's very smug. He's incredibly smug and very angry, even though there's this perception that his material is about nothing. No, it's very angry. It's very he's a condescending prick in a lot of ways, but he's good at what he does. I knew a lot of comics in my 20 years in Los Angeles. I knew a lot of good comics. There's no reason why this comic should be making it and this comic is scraping by. I look at a lot of the comedians and I look at them and I think, wow, this guy is a fucking hack. This is a gimmick. And I'm not going to name names, but there are a number of comics that I watch, and when I talk to regular people, when I talk to civilians, it's like, oh, you think that's funny? Okay. It says a lot, because the hackiest, most obvious shit that I have seen is what sells.
Right.
And I don't get it, and I can't. And this is not a woe is me. I was such a great artist. I didn't make it because I didn't make it. I got no illusions about that. I didn't put the work in the way, or at least I put in the work in the wrong manner. But luck, or in this case, lack of luck, had a lot to do with it, because there were guys that were not as funny as me that had huge careers, and there were guys that were much funnier than myself and the people that are making it today that never made it. Mm-hmm. And for some people it's just bad self-management, bad professional management, bad career choices. When it comes down to it, it's like sometimes it's as simple as turning left when you should have made a right. With Kurt Cobain, the it factor was definitely there, but, and this is something that you brought up Dylan a little bit ago. Dylan was coming up during the end of the middle of the Cold War. The beginning of Vietnam, the middle of Vietnam, Watergate, all of that shit. So there was a changing face in the country. We've talked about this numerous times on the show. Mm-hmm. In many cases, sometimes the world that is created embraces, or at least that person with that factor slips in. And if they had caught him 6 months earlier or 6 months later, the shit wouldn't have happened. I believe that luck is the biggest and most deciding factor in the entertainment game. more so than in
Yeah.
any other. And you know, your life is determined on the job as well by luck. You know, I was doing a joke where I said, pay attention, if you work at a job long enough, pay attention to the biggest ass kisser and the dumbest fuck on the crew. If you stay in a job long enough, that's the motherfucker you'll be working for. It doesn't happen in every case, but it doesn't happen in every case, but it happens enough for me to say it and for it to get a laugh.
Or wisdom behind that.
So like I think being a teenager, because it resonated with you, it didn't resonate with me. It was outside of my, I mean, I was in college. It could have, but it didn't.
There are people that weren't teenagers that recognized it too.
Yeah.
I mean, like, including record executives that were like, we're going to make a killing off of this.
Well, that's the other power of the record. That's the Clive Davis, the Ahmet Erdogan, you know, those guys who can see a talent and say, I can do something with that. That's somebody who says the talent is there. We can grow it, or can look at it and say that's a look. Like they can look at a Britney Spears and say that's a look. We can sell that.
Or we can create that.
Or we can create it. Yeah.
Disney kid. Yeah.
And but it's always been that case. I mean, they've done it.
Sure.
It's a factory, and I think that's what one of the most insightful and enlightening things about what we do. And I'm not talking about for the audience listening. I'm talking for us. If the audience takes it from us, that's great. But for us, in our research, in our understanding of the medium itself, it's the understanding that so much of cinema, so much of music, so much of literature is just that person being able to connect at that time. But throughout the history, whether it's popular music or film, it's a factory, and they find the thing that people like, and then they bleed the fuck out of it. And what's sad is that Kurt Cobain and the suicide years later, you know, that's nothing new. It's Jim Morrison dying in a bathtub 20 years before that. It's Jimi Hendrix, you know, choking on vomit. It's Judy Garland after decades of being used and abused by the system, just finally wearing her body out from overwork and pills. Not to mention Richard Pryor setting himself on fire, or although I just did mention it. I mean, it's the toll that this business takes, and I find that fascinating. And maybe it's a macabre and a morbid way of looking at it, but it's when you do this show, we kind of play amateur psychiatrist trying to understand what the hell it is that takes these artists to the places that they get to. That's the part that's fascinating for me. Yeah,
I mean, it's why, you know, if you listen to Nirvana and you know a little bit of the wider music and influences, it's like the Melvins are not known the way Nirvana is known. The Pixies are not known the way Nirvana is known. And obviously, Kurt Cobain was able to take those elements and make them into something else, and elevate certain things. But it's kind of like the Pixies were a huge influence on Kurt Cobain. But what happens. You know what I mean? It's like, as he said, you know, I'm worst at what I do best, and for this gift I feel blessed. Until he did it. And so it's kind of like what we do in terms of film. There's going to be a lot of films, and there have been films that we talk about that are great films that you've never fucking heard of, because you've never heard of them because some fucking Tom Cruise movie is what you're hearing about, or some fucking whatever nonsense that is made to be nonsense, and it's sold as nonsense, and it's consumed as nonsense, and everyone knows it's fucking nonsense because that's what it's for. That's what's going to make it's made to make money. It makes money. But these are going back to what I said earlier, these are not the like genre defining kind of moments in cinema or in film or in anything where it's like, wow, this is fucking singular, or this is different, or this turned the page. This is new now. The world is different somehow now.
Yeah.
All of these things that kind of like you can put your finger on someone and say like, can we remake this formula? Can we put this lightning in the bottle? Can we make this perfume and fucking spray it on the next act and it'll be the same? No, you can't. But that's the mystery of these art forms.
Well, that's the power of it. I mean, that was our episode. That was 175, Kurt Cobain. The following episode was kind of keeping. But in this case, we're talking about the longevity of the artist. We're talking about George Carlin, 45 years in the industry as a comedian, episode 176, where we were talking about what would have been his 81st birthday, and at that point I think he'd been dead about 7 or 8 years. I think it was 2011 when he passed away. And I don't know if it's equal or more in comparison, your appreciation of Kurt Cobain, but my appreciation for George Carlin, where I didn't realize that those were bookended like that. You look at somebody who moved through the fire and came out the other side, a more accomplished and prolific artist. I mean, sometimes we've talked a little bit when Chuck Berry passed away. We did talk a little bit about Chuck Berry outliving his relevance, which was hard for me to acknowledge because he was always relevant to me. But I'm realistic and
Sure.
And I look at the culture as a whole.
It's like Ali.
Ali, yeah, exactly. It's sad to watch your heroes go the way that they go, and to watch them deteriorate in such a way. That didn't happen with Carlin, and I think by that last special, It's Bad For You, I think he was firing on all cylinders. I think he was producing some of the best work of his career because you got to see the actual evolution of an artist, of a spoken word artist, delving into going from the dreams of a young man who just wanted to be looked at and laughed with and laughed at, into this curmudgeonly old man who wanted to make a comment, who wanted to present a commentary on society, but had also come to this point in his life where he realized that none of it mattered. And it was just a matter of screaming into the wind. And that's what a lot of people have a problem with the later years, the last decade of Carlin's output. And for me, that's when he did his best stuff. I really love the darkest shit, the angriest, when Carlin was really taking no prisoners and just saying fuck you to all of them. That's the Carlin that I embraced. That's the one where I learned the most, not only about comedy, stand-up as an art form, but also the species as a whole, because I know you and I disagreed a little bit about this, but I really do see certain comics, at least, as modern-day philosophers, and because they're some of the only people that are willing. And the few that are, I'm talking about the Patrice O'Neills, the Bill Hickses, the Carlins, to a degree, Bill Burr. These guys that are able to look at the social fabric and say there's something wrong here. Even Bill Maher, as much as I disagree with him on a lot of issues, you do see somebody up there who is taking a stand and saying something that at least they believe in, whether right or wrong. And in some cases, it's very wrong, and in some cases, it's on point. And in some cases, it's just a matter of picking the best bad choice.
Yeah,
But,
I mean,
you know,
sorry,
no, go ahead, please.
I call that a cultural critic.
Yeah,
Just because someone is good at arguing doesn't make them a lawyer.
you're right. You're right.
So in the same way, just because you are criticizing culture or have ideas, that doesn't make someone a philosopher.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a different thing with different specific traits, with a different specific set of rules, so to speak.
Well,
so,
it could simply be a matter of semantics and how we define philosopher, and you coming from your background.
Broad.
Well, yeah, because it's more of an artistic thing, and yours is more of a historical and cultural. So I could be bastardizing the word. You're probably more on point for what the traditional sense of a philosopher is. Mine would be the bastardization and the transformation, the evolution of the word, and the role it plays in society today. I don't know if that's it's kind of a matter of bucking tradition in a sense, I guess, but I don't think there's anybody doing what the tradition. There's very few people doing what the traditional philosophers once did, which I guess would be looking at and speculating on the purpose of the species and life as a whole. But I think
also looking at.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, traditionally philosophers, and there are. I mean, there are, but like the thing is that it's people in general are not interested in like, oh, what did Byung-Chul Han publish recently? You know what I mean? Like there are a handful of people who do philosophy that are known to the public. Like there's Slavoj Žižek because he does a lot of pop cultural type of shit, and he does examinations that are mixed with like psychology. So he's looking at like a fucking Marxist Lacanian take on fucking Hitchcock.
Mm-hmm.
And so you watch a documentary and it's like, oh shit, okay, so this guy's, and I last mentioned him when we did Jaws. But I mean, there are people doing philosophy, but philosophy is an academic field. It's not a pop cultural field.
Yeah.
And so people don't really, so even the idea that philosophy doesn't exist anymore, people are doing philosophy, but they're not.
Concede to that, yeah.
They're not getting recognition because already it's such an insular kind of thing, and they're talking about ideas that go into all these different aspects of life, but they go into ideas also looking through the lens of the history of those same ideas. And so, like, unfortunately, I think probably, like, if someone says a modern day philosopher, they're going to think of someone like a Jordan Peterson, who may be considered like a public intellectual, and or pseudo intellectual, but that's also a person who is his background is in psychology, not in philosophy, and he's also highly agenda driven, highly ideological, and very much pushing his perspective, using the work of I don't even remember the guy's name. The guy has a book called Understanding Postmodernism, which is, and I'm going into the weeds, but the guy he quotes that he bases his whole attack on the left and all this stuff is based on this other book that mischaracterizes all this shit. So it's built up on all these fucking straw men, and it's very ideological. So it's kind of like, that's kind of the TikTok understanding that people have
Yeah.
a philosophy and especially like young fanboys on the internet are like, oh, well, the great thinkers of our time, if we want to hear them, we have to tune into Joe Rogan or Lex Friedman or whoever these fucking people are, so that we can get these amazing interviews. And like, it's so cool to hear fucking diverse opinions and to actually hear like intellectuals that have helped us so much, because young men are in such need of fucking help right now, because like, why are young men so angry? And it's like, please, why are young men angry? Really?
Yeah.
There are reasons, but it's kind of like, let's let go of the fucking MAGA white grievance for a little bit and fucking like put on a fucking Nirvana album, put on a fucking Chuck Berry, put on, you know what I mean? Like, it's in them and it's got to come out, but there are ways to do it. So,
well, that's the thing with Carlin, with
right,
with Cobain for some people. With I think what it is that each one of us is looking for something. Each one of us is looking for answers and purpose, and art does that. Art really does provide. I mean, how many times I remember, we've talked a little bit about this, where I remember being at the Art Museum, Art Institute of Chicago, and looking at the Pollock, looking at that wall that was a Pollock, and being overwhelmed by something that I just did not understand. But there was something about it that made my life better. And it was the expression of what was in somebody. I cannot for the life of me break down what that painting meant. I don't know what Pollock's intention of it was, or why he would come upon this type of style of creating. But I know that it resonated. Now with Carlin, I get the sense of recognizing the anger and placing it into context. And I think a lot of us, especially when we're young, we're raging and we're angry and we're pissed off. And in some cases, we know what we're pissed off about. But in a lot of cases, and I think more often than not, we don't know. We don't understand why the world is as fucked up as it is and why it's as difficult to get along as we find ourselves doing. When you hear somebody of a certain age, an elder, talking about it, if you're at least empathetic and open-minded, you're going to take a step back and say, he might be full of shit, but there's a good chance that this is coming from a place of experience, and I should probably listen to somebody who has been through it. So, in effect, George Carlin got me through the roughest times of life because I understood that it wasn't as simple as black and white, that there were nuances, that there were that it's all bullshit and it's bad for you, that sometimes you ain't got nothing but bad choices in front of you and you have to make the best bad choice. I loved the recognition of the hopelessness, but when you recognize the hopelessness, you can find that ember of hope. And I don't think that's been more apparent than in the times that we're in right now. Last week we talked about the Trump presidency and the effect that it's had on our processing of this show. I wouldn't have thought about that to the degree that I've been thinking about it if it hadn't been for you bringing it up. But it's something that is there now. It's something that I'm aware of, and it's something that I can't forget and I can't ignore. So, all of this, I think what we do, and let's face it, it's just a couple of guys on a microphone talking about the shit that fascinates them, talking about the shit that aggravates them, and how it plays out into life. cinema, music, literature, how all of that portrays the world around us and makes it, at least hopefully, a little bit easier to deal with. That's what and to sit down and discuss it with a friend and hear your viewpoint versus my viewpoint and try to come to an even better understanding is the point of all this for me. It might be different for you, it might be different for the listener, but it's definitely the kind of thing that I walk away from saying, I hadn't looked at it from that perspective. I think I understand it a little bit. Either I understand it better or at least I understand it differently. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's trying to get the long view, and it puts a crazy, you mentioned Pollock, and Pollock was my age when he died. You've already outlived Jackson Pollock.
Yeah.
Forget Kurt Cobain. That's 27 Club.
I also outlived John Belushi and Jesus Christ. I've already won, so that was my, those were my goals. I don't see anybody kneeling to pray for me. Yeah, we need the firewood.
That's right. We did at that time, and this isn't at the time thing. We did cinema villains and heroes, and it's kind of like in those things. Obviously, I mean, some things are going to stay the same, some things are going to change. In terms of opinion, this is what it is.
But I think we talked a little bit about the created monsters, the Frankensteins, the Wolfmans, the vampires into the slasher genre. We talked about real life villains being portrayed on film, and we talked about what they represent. And I think we came down to our two top ones were both the Wicked Witch of the West and Darth Vader. Two iconic.
Maybe if we want to give that away instead of having people listen to it, maybe.
Well, they're going to listen. They're going to. It's fucking 7 years ago.
I mean, yeah. No. I mean, sure.
Yeah.
Exactly. But those are solid picks.
Yeah. It's the iconic nature of it. There's a reason that we remember Anthony Hopkins' Hannibal Lecter versus Brian Cox's Hannibal Lecter. And I think Brian Cox did a hell of a job portraying Lecter. But it's not what Anthony Hopkins did. It was smaller. But at the same time, you remember De Niro as Max Cady. But who's scarier? Robert Mitchum as Max Cady? I think that's that's not Robert Mitchum. You're going to see in a bar. You see Robert Mitchum. You see Max Cady as portrayed by Robert Mitchum in a bar. Finish your drink and get the fuck out of there. And if there's too much drink to drink, leave that fucking drink and get the hell out of there. You're not going to run it. Yeah.
No, I mean, the thing is, you're going to say you're not going to run into Robert De Niro. I mean, you can see Robert De Niro's Max Cady coming a mile away.
Yeah.
You may never see Robert Mitchum's.
Yeah.
You may never live to see it. You may fucking die before you even see him.
It's crazy.
So we did greatest cinema villains. You on your own did Bad News Bears. We did cinema heroes.
Yeah.
We started. What was the beginning of it was going to be it ended up being like a 10 episode, kind of what this might be. What we're doing now might end up, but it was episode 180 was part one of a series on the history of TV.
I think we finished that. I think we went all the way.
We did finish it.
We didn't finish music.
We did all the way to...
Yeah.
No, music was...
We hit an impasse with music.
We had to pull over. But,
yeah, we had to.
But TV, we went up right up until where we were.
And the fact of the matter is that we've gone another decade since then, where we could do another decade of we could do another history of television that would capture what was left over.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, and what would there be a difference between the last episode of that series and this one? Because has enough changed, or is it all just fucking streaming now? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that first episode was the beginnings of fucking TV.
Yeah.
The beginnings of what, I mean, that's to contemplate that is fucking crazy.
Yeah.
And then, of course we all take it fucking for granted, but it's a time before fucking television.
Mm-hmm.
Then we did an episode on Anthony Bourdain because he died.
Mm-hmm.
So it was another one of those kind of like, I mean, not to the level, obviously, of like a Kurt Cobain, because Anthony Bourdain isn't seen as like this generational whatever figure, but Anthony Bourdain is and was seen as someone who was utterly authentic
Mm-hmm.
and different and really admired and very much was willing to put all of his demons, like not all of them. Ultimately, there were more than we knew about, but he was willing to put a lot of it on display, and it was a cool moment for me because it was you didn't really know about Bourdain. You hadn't watched the shows.
I was aware of him. I hadn't embraced him. I knew who he was, but
well,
I was not.
I mean, yeah, of course, you know who he was, but it's like, but even then, there's a difference between embracing versus even having seen any of the episodes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There was stuff on there that we saw that I think, because at the end his last show was on CNN.
Mm-hmm.
It was broadcast through CNN, and I guess if I remember correctly, Netflix, like, even if there were early seasons or whatever that weren't on there, I think they just put the whole fucking catalog on. Because he did several shows throughout his career after he wrote Kitchen Confidential, the book that fucking started out as an article,
mm-hmm.
and then blew him up. And it was interesting because I started watching Bourdain from when he was on one of those cooking food networks or whatever. And then it was the books, and a particular period of my life, and then taking a road trip to New York, and then he ended up that he was doing a reading, and so, going to that, hearing him do a reading in person, getting the signed copy, it was cool. To the point where, he takes his life in 2018, and then to not literally sit with you and watch them, but it's like, to make this little menu, so to speak, and be like, we're going to do an Anthony Bourdain tasting. And then it was cool that you got it. You saw it and you got it. And to see these different places that you went to, and to see also his interest in cinema, and to see how he used that influence and interest in his episodes.
Yeah.
And to see him talk to Francis Ford Coppola or different people.
Mm-hmm.
And since then there's been a documentary,
Roadrunner,
which I think Roadrunner, which would be interesting because going back to Cobain, it's like that one takes a particular view of, or subtle or maybe not so subtle, it takes a view of Asia Argento and kind of like turns her into the villain of that, which I don't think is fair.
Well, I'm not as interested in that. What is interesting to me, and I don't know if you'll agree with me, I think you will, but the fascinating thing about an Anthony Bourdain, more so than a Gordon Ramsay, let's say Gordon Ramsay, who is bluster, Emile Lagrasse, who's blustery, or Martha Stewart, who's kind of prim and proper. There was an excitement
and a criminal,
but with Bourdain, there was a true love that came off the screen. The man loved what he was doing, and loved culture. And this is something that I have faulted a lot of these guys that do these shows, these travel shows. And it's a I don't know if it's a warranted or an unwarranted prejudice that I have against white people who do those shows. But Bourdain never explained culture to the people that he was showcasing. And that meant more to me than anything that he did. The fact that he would go as a student of life and culture and people, and he would sit back and I'm saying aloud because it's his show. He could have not done this. He allowed them to speak and talk to their culture, talk to the experiences, the history, what these foods meant, and you could see the excitement and the thrill that he had in dining not just on the food, but with these people, learning something, exploring the world, being a true student of the world, rather than somebody who goes into a place and tries to teach them about themselves. I've seen that happen too many times, and I hate it every time. I never saw that with Anthony Bourdain. Now, granted, I didn't see all of the episodes. I haven't seen all of the episodes, but one of the great things that I appreciated about him was that he never tried to explain to the people that he was profiling who they were. Mm-hmm. It seems like an obvious thing, but if you watch other shows of this type, it's not the common method. For whatever he was, however difficult he might have been, he really did appreciate the people he was sitting with.
Right. And he was able to strike that balance between, there's travel and there's tourism. Mm-hmm. And those are different things. And he was able to hit certain highlights while at the same time, like, getting lost. He was literally like breaking bread with these people, which is the word companion comes from that. That's the etymology, is to have bread with someone. Mm-hmm. Pan is bread. And the reason why, what I mentioned earlier, it does interest me, these aspects of this documentary, which I think at some point we should visit, mm-hmm. Is the kind of the creation of we talk about the greatest heroes and villains. It's kind of like, well, in this in the way that the documentary is constructed, he is in that story the tragic hero.
Yeah.
And like Kurt Cobain, and then so you have to have your drama, and then you have to have your villain, right? And it's like, well, a lot of times what happens is the woman becomes the villain. And another element that I think that is important to that documentary, which we should also discuss, which faces all of us today, is that the use of AI in that documentary. Mm-hmm. So they use AI to have Bourdain artificially narrate the story.
It's problematic.
And I've seen that for that film, and I've seen it for a documentary on Andy Warhol.
Didn't they do it to a degree with Val Kilmer, the Val Kilmer documentary?
They might have done it to, but I think that's also like,
but that's different.
The participation.
Yes,
and this the participation of that's also different, and they're using it to mm-hmm. help him like express himself.
Yeah,
as he would have liked, or mm-hmm. Because he's there. Anthony Bourdain and Andy Warhol are both dead. And of course, Andy Warhol is more famous beyond 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. And Andy Warhol, I think it's cool and appropriate that they would use that they would use artificial intelligence to construct a narrative using a rendering of his voice, because that speaks to Andy Warhol's the whole thing, which was a critique of our society and the artificiality of it, and the manufactured nature of consumerism, art, all of it, fame. Anthony Bourdain is more going back to the keeping it real type of shit, and that the struggles of that. So I think that's something that is very yes, it's problematic, and I think it lends itself to a greater conversation.
We're going to have to talk about that at some point, because I have issues with both Bourdain, with that for Bourdain, but also Carrie Fisher and Peter Cushing in one of the last Star Wars movies where that was utilized. Or they're getting to the point where they can basically create a performance out of nothing. And that's a very disturbing possibility. But that's an episode for itself, where we would talk about that, Ex Machina, Blade Runner to a degree, the self-awareness, the creation, the more human than human. It's a frightening prospect.
Right. I mean, and they've done renderings of fucking like what a new Nirvana song would be.
Yeah.
I listened the other day to there's a popular I told you about him. He's a YouTuber who's a musician, producer. He does music shit, and so he played. It was a shuffle drum beat, a Led Zeppelin shuffle drum beat.
Yeah. So
he plays John Bonham's B, and I don't know if it was "Fool in the Rain," whatever song it was, and later material, and then he plays it the way a computer would render it, and it completely sounds hollow and lacks any sense of swing the way the computer does it, because all the beats like sound the same. And it's just that. It's kind of like if you have an algorithm so-called creating something, it's not the same. I mean, and like the ChatGPT thing, for a long time, I was a freelance fucking copy editor, so I would help other people fulfill their writing dreams and defer my own.
And get paid. So
yeah. And now that I'll never do that again, because I'm not needed as a human being to help someone write anything, or fix their writing or work or whatever you want to call it. That's completely, I'm obsolete in that realm, and therefore I am rudderless. And I've seen ChatGPT. I've like very briefly, because I'm very much against it, in terms of creative writing. So I only used it because I said, well, what kind of, I want a ChatGPT poem. And obviously it's like a proponent of ChatGPT will be like, well, your product is only going to be as good as the prompts that you give it. Okay, sure. At that point, I might as well just write a poem myself. But okay, so I tried it several times, and the poetry was very cliche, and it was like, that's not what we're looking for. Your next episode was going back to the Comedy Store, episode 182, and it's like, this is not ChatGPT creating these fucking people going on stage to or creating their routines. Probably at some point it will. People who either they steal them or they fucking dip from when you begin in any art form, you dip from the past and you dip from the cliche.
Sure.
The idea is that you get beyond that. But how far beyond does I haven't seen any of this stuff go to the cliche, go beyond cliche. Any of this artificial shit. The artificial, is it capable of suffering to create some art? And not all art has to come from suffering, but it has to come from more than just the mind, or you know what I mean? Like, there's so much more to it that we don't know about. What is creativity? I don't know. But going back to the Comedy Store, I know that was a big one for you.
It was an interesting thing because, number one, I forgot that I did that episode. I think I've done 3 episodes in the Comedy Store now, and it's I need to go back and listen to that episode. The Comedy Store is such a major part of my life. I mean, it represented everything that I wanted, that I dreamed of, that I aspired to. It was this mecca for me. I don't mean to diminish anybody's belief system, but that's what it was to me. It was this place. It was the first. It was a
pilgrimage, basically.
Yeah, I mean, the first time that I went, we talked about this. The first time I went to L.A., I went there. That was the first place that I went to. And if you remember, I fucking walked. I walked from the hotel that I was staying at in Century City to the Comedy Store. Now, granted, I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. I didn't know how far it was. I just started walking. Part of it was too fucking cheap to get a cab, but also I didn't know my way around that town, so I walked. I think it must have been about 5 or 6 miles to the Comedy Store, uphill at certain points, and I encountered this weird place that was completely different from anything that I had ever imagined. You would not be able to really imagine what it was. It was just this black building sitting there with fucking, it was soulless. It had nothing. It had a darkness to it. It was angry. It was an angry place. And I remember being there going, when you see all the red flags, but you're ignoring everything because you've built something up in your head. That was the Comedy Store to me. Looking back on it, any reasonable person would have run from that place. I didn't. I leaned right into it. It's what I wanted. I had convinced myself that it was the greatest place on earth. And I still think, to a degree, for comedy, for stand-up, it is the greatest place that you can go. Now, today's Comedy Store is nothing like it was in 2000 or when I visited back in 98 or 99. It was 99 when I went to visit it. It was 2000 when I started sitting on the porch to pull numbers for the potluck, for the open mic. And it was 2001 when I became a door guy, earning the position of comic there the way it was done in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. I was very proud of that. And when the old lady passed me, it was the proudest moment of my life. So, talking about it in 2017 in this episode,
18.
It was 2018, I apologize. 6 years ago, 2 years before I would ultimately leave Los Angeles. It'd be interesting to go back and listen to the naivete of that recording. How much of it was on point, how much of it was angry, how much of it was nostalgic. It's definitely one where it's kind of interesting because I'm going through these episodes and I'm like, wow, I forgot we did that. But what I can say, I never half-assed a solo episode, and we never half-assed an episode that we did together. We were always committed, whether we liked the movies or disliked the movies that we were watching, whether we were disappointed. There was always this sense that there was something that needed to be said about the topic itself. And I think that's what made both the solo episodes and our partnership on the other episodes so important. I hope audiences take that from it. I really do hope that audiences listen to these episodes and say, wow, these guys are really... Okay, these guys are intelligent about what they're speaking of, and they speak intelligently, but they also speak from the heart. Because for me, that's the most important aspect of everything. It's that there's an honest and open window into what we believe.
That was definitely one of these very personal and just crazy episodes when it comes to stuff like that. We went on with the history of TV, and so we went from the origins of TV, through the 50s and 60s. Up on episode 2 was basically right into the Vietnam era of TV, which is and with a real focus on the 70s and Norman Lear, and think of 70s cinema. 70s TV. So it's like Good Times,
socially conscious television, race issues, feminism, homosexuality, the Vietnam War. Norman Lear was on the forefront of that white liberal, oftentimes Jewish sentiment of challenging the status quo, and I think the culture is better off for it. It's pretty amazing. Pretty amazing times.
And the way we did it was we would just throw out names. There was a long list that we would go through and just kind of riff on all of these shows. And so...
Yeah, our memories of it. And it's interesting because we didn't grow up in the 70s. We were watching them in reruns. So we're watching all of... it's weird. We're watching something... we're watching the shows that we watch that have evolved from these earlier shows, but then we're watching those earlier shows to see a different time, a different place, a different mentality and attitude about subjects. So when you watch something like my favorite shows were definitely the Norman Lear shows, the Jeffersons, All in the Family, but Maude. So you got that sense of what the culture was like and how we came to where we were. And at our age back then, I didn't understand it entirely, but I knew that there was something important about these stories that I was watching. And I fell in love. I think our generation were those television kids where you would get home from school at 2:30, 3 o'clock, and boom, you turn the TV on and you were catching Gilligan's Island, the Brady Bunch, but then you were catching all those other ones and again, the UHF channels, the side channels. You were watching reruns of shit that came years before, sometimes 20, 30 years, sometimes only a decade. It was really a study in culture. And I think we were laying down the foundation of what we would ultimately aspire to. And because at this point, this show that we do once a week for 10 years, this is not a hobby anymore. This is a passion. And it's a passion because there's not a lot of money in it. We're covering costs, basically. We're covering costs from the goodwill of people out there who see value and who hear the value in what we do and are willing to go to, buymeacoffee.com/watchthis with Watch RickRamos. The generosity And in a weird way, that is a psychological boost, because I don't know about you. I think because you're as fucking paranoid and as insecure as I am about the art.
What do you mean by that? I'm just kidding.
Yeah. What is the point of all this that we do? This, for me, this is my once a week opportunity to talk to one of my best friends and remember things, agree on things, argue about things, disagree. But at the end of the day, you fortify your position. The fact that there are listeners who go all the way back to the beginning that are still here, that is a boost to the confidence and belief that what we're doing is not simply a hobby. There's a purpose to it. Yeah. So,
and I mean, and God forbid we fucking modify our position and not just fortify it. You know, there's. I'm a person who very much like could easily just be a hermit. But it is good to step outside of one's fucking head and be like, oh shit, like, damn, that's so crazy. I'm fucking not the center of the universe. Wow. What do you know?
It's a hard realization.
Every time I get in, especially when I drive, I think I'm it, and everyone's just in my way. And I'm not, you know, and so even if it's just with the buy me a coffee thing, it's like we've done it in the past and we're gonna do it again, and we're gonna try a membership option, and in the past we've done it where we've taken some request episodes from people who have given the most consistently or the most and so the point that I'm getting at, besides just fucking like this is not a commercial in the center of the fucking episode, is that in those times when we've gotten requests, those are not necessarily we've done 3 request episodes, and it's not like we were necessarily some of those films. It's a Wonderful Life, Popeye, and
Perfect Blue.
Would we have gotten to those films? Maybe, maybe not. Popeye, probably. I don't see myself saying like, you know what would be interesting? Let's just fucking do Popeye. And it was interesting because it's someone else saying, you know what would be interesting if you guys were to do Popeye, and it's kind of like it really cleanses the palate and takes us in a different direction. So it does create a sense of more dialogue beyond just someone saying like, hey, which is also fucking cool when someone says, you know, not just fucking like post-debate Joe Biden's wife saying like, you did a really good job, like you answered all the questions, Joe. Like not just that, or you know, Trump's people saying like, you told all the lies that we expected, like amazing. It's actual feedback that means something from people, and so whether it's, hey, all I can do is $5 a month, that's a lot. Or if it's fucking like, hey, I can't give you shit because I fucking have 4 ex-wives and I fucking have all this child support. My life sucks, but you guys make it a little bit better. You know what I mean? So I just want to say thank you. That means a lot too.
Well, let's do the thank you, and let's, you know, thank you. We appreciate it.
This is one gonna go to everybody.
There's a whole lot left to talk about, and I don't see this being a quick thing. So We're going to break this episode at this point. Come back next week and move through the continuing saga of Watch This with RickRamos. Thank you for listening, and we hope that you're enjoying it. We hope that you are enjoying this trip down memory lane and this remembrance of what the podcast means to us and hopefully what it means to you. So stay tuned. We'll be back again real soon. Bye-bye.